Okay, so today we're going to talk about how this little guy, our friend the amniotic egg, basically made it possible for reptiles to take over the earth. First, we have to talk about what was the world like when all of this was happening. So, basically, we're going to be in the Carboniferous period. This was before the dinosaurs. The world was old. It was just, well, very, very old. And everything that we know now, a lot of it didn't exist yet. So basically, the most of the life was in the oceans. We had our sharks, we had our fish, sponges, all that good stuff. On land, we had very little though. Basically, the most advanced animals on land were amphibians, and since they had no predators, they were at the top of the food chain. They were gigantic. We know this from fossils. Basically, there were giant frogs that were about the size of people. There were giant salamanders and newts. They were the size of like crocodiles. They're called like amphibio reptiles, something like that. But basically, they were the biggest animals on land. And what was going to happen was that the world was going to enter a massive global shift. It was partially climate change, but basically, the world was going to get a lot drier, and it has to do with the way the continents were moving and things in the atmosphere and just a lot of geological processes. But basically, the continents were going to come together. And there were going to be vast deserts that were going to form, and a lot of these wet places in the world were just going to shrink, to disappear, and be replaced with deserts. And so there was this evolutionary pressure to basically adapt to these drier conditions. And since our most advanced animals are vertebrates on land, were just amphibians, they weren't going to be the best suited for this new kind of world. As an amphibian, you're basically tied to the water. You feed in the water. You live in the water. You're born in the water, and you basically grow up in the water. And you can't stray too far from it, or you'll die. Also, your skin is very moist, and you have to keep it that way, or else you'll dry out and die. And that's where this little guy comes in. So at some point in evolution, these giant amphibians started to, instead of laying their eggs in the water, they started to lay them on Earth. At first on wet, soft Earth, but then they started to venture out into drier and drier Earth, I guess. And at some point, one of them laid an amniotic egg, or something that was a more primitive version of it, but basically had a few what do you call it? Innovations. The first one being the eggshell. And basically, this is going to change. This is just going to change the world forever for vertebrates. Whereas before, the reproduction was tied to the water. Now, with this amniotic egg, they're essentially going to take that water, that pond, with them, and they're going to have it on dry land. And when you open up reproductive possibilities, and you open up possibilities just for life and just living in general. And so it's basically going to be the first step in animals taking over the land. And basically these amphibians are eventually going to evolve into our very first reptiles. The reptiles are going to have rough, scaly skin that's going to keep them from drying out. They're going to be better adapted for life on land. They're going to have more efficient lungs, more efficient hearts. They have 3-chambered hearts. But they also have a bunch of other disadvantages, like not being able to breathe through their skin anymore, since frogs and amphibians could actually get like 25% of their oxygen through their skin alone. But just their innovations overall are just going to be so much better that it's going to make up for that. And basically, this egg is going to open up all of those possibilities, and along with the eggshell, it also has a few other innovations as well. All three of them are membranes, specifically and they're not all going to evolve at once. They're going to happen in stages throughout time, which we can see through fossils. But basically, you're going to have membranes that are going to also help it. Um, the first one is going to be the chorion or the chorion. I don't really know how to pronounce things. But basically, um, the chorion is going to keep the water in. Some of it is going to evaporate out, which is why there'll be a little space inside once the chick or small lizard is born. Um, Basically, the shell itself is porous, meaning that it's filled with pores, and these pores are going to allow gases to go in and out of of the egg. Um, so the developing chick or whatever doesn't need to have gills, but it could just breathe through the eggshell itself. And gases can also go in and out of the chorion. The chorion. Anyway, gases can go in and out of them. And inside the chorion, you're going to have two other membranes, basically the amnion and the allantois. The allantois is essentially going to be a waste sac. It's like a giant diaper that the embryo will use. The chorion and the allantois together are going to be filled with blood vessels, and they're going to have a lot of surface area for the embryo to exchange gases with the outside world, because again it's porous. And basically, then you have that last membrane, and that is the amnion. And the amnion is basically going to be the membrane that surrounds the embryo, and that's going to be the womb of the animal, pretty much. And basically, it's going to free up our animals from having to live a life tied to water, to ponds. Essentially, it is going to take like a part of the pond with it, and you could basically lay it like in the sand, in the desert, in the forests. Although those forests would have been very different because they wouldn't have had any flowers. And basically, it's just going to set the stage for these animals to really take over the earth. Um, uh, Basically, the amphibians are going to give rise to the reptiles. The reptiles are then going to give rise to the birds. The dinosaurs will die off. Birds will survive. Many of them will also die. And then a group of the reptiles, the synaptids, will evolve into mammals. And that's actually what makes us amniotes too. Although we don't have the amniotic egg, we basically develop inside an amnion, which is a membrane inside the mother's womb. And basically the chorion and the allantois basically evolve into the placenta. And the eggshell is just gone. It's basically going to take the apparatus of the egg and basically develop internally inside the mother's uterus. And that's basically where we come from. So next time you have this little guy for breakfast, sunny side up or hard boiled or however you like it, or maybe you're a vegan and you have it made of soy. But anyway, next time you see an egg, just think about all the innovations it brought with it in the evolution of the reptile. And I don't know, bon appetit, I guess.